think it was really important for me and important for a lot of women to just focus on the positive stories alone. And especially when people talk about unmedicated birth or home birth, a lot of women are scared and fearful of childbirth, and for good reason, because there's not a lot of positive messages about it in mainstream media.
Hi everyone, thank you for joining me today. My name is Krista, I'm from Mommy Knows Best, and today we have a very exciting guest. Her name is Bekah Martinez, and you may recognize her. She was a castmate from The Bachelor, but these days she is tackling motherhood as a new mom of a cute little girl. Welcome, Bekah. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So just to get started, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
I don't even know where to begin. It's funny, you mentioned The Bachelor and it feels like ages ago, but I was on The Bachelor, I guess, last year. And shortly after that, while the show was airing, I met my current boyfriend. And 2 months into dating, I got pregnant. And then fast forward to now, I have a 5-month-old little girl. Her name is Ruth. At the moment, I'm kind of like a stay-at-home / work-at-home mom. My job, I kind of call it social media marketing, but I guess the obnoxious term for it is influencing. That allows me a lot of freedom with my job, which is awesome. I get to be home all day with my daughter. And then in the fall, I'll actually be going back to school to try to finish my bachelor's degree, hopefully by next spring. So that's something I also did while I was pregnant. I went back to school last fall. So those are just kind of the highlights of what's going on in my life right now. I also have a podcast called Chatty Broads.
You shared all about your natural birth as well just recently on a YouTube channel, which I thought that was so cool. So I definitely want to get into that too. What was the transition like starting as becoming an influencer because, you know, people knew you from the show and then kind of transitioning into motherhood on social media? Like, what was that transition kind of like?
Yeah, it was interesting because definitely my audience shifted a little bit. I mean, I still have a lot of the same followers from the show, but now it's kind of, it's interesting. It's like now I'm a mom influencer, which is kind of different. And it's awesome because there's a lot of support and there's like a lot, you feel like you have kind of a big community behind your back, but there's also a lot more criticism that you don't really face when it's just you. And I know that all moms deal with this, regardless of whether or not they have a large social media following. There can be a lot of judgment and mom shaming, and it's definitely a real thing. You kind of are under scrutiny about your life in a way that you weren't before.
I really want to jump into all about how you had an unmedicated birth and when and how did you make that decision?
I think like the minute I got pregnant, it's something, I don't know where that came from. But like from the minute I found out I was pregnant, I knew I wanted to go a less medicalized route, if that makes sense, for my pregnancy and birth. I don't know where that really came from. I followed a lot of birth accounts on Instagram before I got pregnant, just because I've always been fascinated with it. They're like Empowered Birth Project, Carriage House Birth. There's a lot of good resources on Instagram, and I was just curious. Then shortly after I got pregnant, one of the first books I read was Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. And that book became like my Bible all throughout my pregnancy because Ina May really focuses on the power that each woman has to give birth and how birth doesn't have to be a terrifying thing. And the first half of the book is really just positive stories about unmedicated childbirth in more natural settings. I think all the stories are about home births. And I think it was really important for me and important for a lot of women to just focus on the positive stories alone. And especially when people talk about unmedicated birth or home births, that is the opportunity where people jump in and say like, oh, well, I heard about this mom or this happened. You know, it's all fear-based, and also the images that we're inundated with through media, you know, on movies, TV shows, you see women screaming, going through unbearable pain. And a lot of women are scared and fearful of childbirth, and for good reason, because there's not a lot of positive messages about it in mainstream media. And even when I was talking to some of my friends about it, you know, they were like, I I just want to have a C-section and get it over with. And I have no issue with people who have C-sections. My mom had 2 after me. But also I think there's something to be said about if you have the option to do a unmedicated vaginal childbirth, I think women don't realize the potential to come into your own power through that experience. So anyway, that book really gave me a lot of confidence in my body and confidence in that decision. And also, I just don't like hospitals. That's just me. And I know some people feel safer in hospitals. One of my friends was telling me that. I feel safer just personally outside of hospitals. It just gives me anxiety. And I knew that I wanted to feel really calm throughout my birth experience. And I also didn't have any complications. And then I also watched the video or the movie, The Business of Being Born. And anyway, so all the resources kind of pointed for me that the best decision for me would be to have a midwife. And the one I went with she's awesome. She has full privileges at a hospital next door to the birth center. If I had to have an emergency C-section, she would be able to participate in the surgery and be there every step of the way. So I was like, this seems like a really good option for me. And like I said, the birth center was right next door to a hospital and both were only 10 minutes away from me. Everything kind of made sense. And then when I went and met with her, it was just like a very warm environment. When I would go to my prenatal checkups, we would take as long as we needed, an hour even, and just like sit and chat. And it felt like a family to me. That's kind of how I made that decision. That was the long-winded version.
No, that's awesome, because I think it's what I kept hearing was the research and then just going with your gut. And I think a lot of women tend to either ignore it or they get all these other input on the outside. So that's really awesome that you were like, this is what I'm doing. And you just did your research. And
my partner and mother were really supportive. And so I think that helps too, is it's definitely easier when you have family support for whatever decision you make.
What were some of the tips or things you read about to help prepare yourself for this natural birth up until the day of?
Yeah, it's funny because I've gotten comments like, oh, you look really peaceful or this or that. And I put in hours and hours of preparation, and I definitely wouldn't recommend that people go in with the mindset of like, oh, I'll just wing it. Like, I'll just see what happens, So I think that if that's your goal, to have an unmedicated birth, you need to prepare yourself in order to make it the most peaceful experience possible. I just kind of saturated myself with positive stories. I just would look up on YouTube, gentle birth, like natural water birth, just all those kind of things, a peaceful birth. And that just helped get me in a good mindset. And then also, I think I reread Ina May's guide twice. And then I'd listen to the Birth Hour podcast, and I'd kind of only listen to stories of how I wanted my birth to go, if that makes sense. So I didn't scare myself. I also took a hypnobirthing class hosted locally. The hypnobirthing class was good. For me, I didn't feel like it was the best fit. I felt like my own kind of research and exploration was the most helpful for me, especially for moms on a budget. You can find, meditation videos on YouTube. You can find birth stories on YouTube. There's a lot of free resources. But yeah, those are kind of like the preparations that I did. I would have liked to say that I did a lot of yoga and meditation during my pregnancy, and I didn't. I actually didn't really want to move at all. Kind of just more this mental preparation, just getting me in a mindset where ultimately I was just excited. I was like, I couldn't wait to go into labor, and I couldn't wait to see how I would kind of face the challenge. I sort of framed it in my mind like a marathon kind of. And that's kind of how I explain it to women when they say like, well, why would you want to do that? And it's like, well, a marathon isn't for everyone, but if you feel like doing it and challenging yourself, it can be a really empowering and positive experience, one that takes a lot of preparation. And similarly to a marathon, like I'm not going to like look down on other people who didn't choose to do a marathon. It's just like, oh, we're different people who enjoy different types of challenges.
Walk us through how like the day of the labor went, things throughout the day, and just your story.
I was in labor for 31 hours total. And I kind of expected that because my mom was actually in labor with me for 34 hours, I believe. Our labors went really similarly. She actually had a video of mine, so I got to watch that, which was really, really cool. I went into labor on a Thursday evening, and it's funny because my mom had told me she said, I wish when I went into labor that I just went back to sleep. She was like, if that happens to you, go back to sleep because it's going to be a long journey and you're going to want to get your energy. And of course, like my labor really kicked into action at like 2 a.m. on that Thursday night. And I was like sitting up in bed, like timing every contraction every 10 minutes because I was so excited. Looking back on it, I would say the same thing as my mom did, like go to sleep. But I couldn't help it. I was too excited. At first, actually, with the first contractions, when they started really, not really picking up, but when they got like a tad bit more intense, I started getting really anxious. I was laying in bed with my boyfriend and I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm not ready for this. Like, oh, and I started freaking out. And then I actually put on some Simon and Garfunkel and I was just like, okay, it's gonna be all right. Everything's good. I had to bring some like positive vibes back into it. I called my mom and she was like, you're good, you're taken care of. Just spoke some encouraging words to me. At like 4 or 5 in the morning, my labor kind of stopped and I was only getting a contraction every hour or so. And the next day, like all of Friday, I went to see my midwife and I was only a centimeter dilated. And throughout that whole day, I would maybe have a contraction every hour or so. And I tried to rest as much as I could. Also, I was 40 weeks and 3 days, and I had walked the equivalent of like 17 flights of stairs on that Thursday before I went into labor. So I was also really tired because of that. Like I hadn't slept much throughout the night. So all Friday, I just kind of tried to doze off, just watch movies. And then it was funny. It was like the minute the sun went down on Friday night, my contractions started picking up again. So I was kind of like a night laborer. I needed the cover of darkness to like get into gear. Yeah, it's funny. I don't know why that is, but I've heard that from other women too. My labor really started to I could tell like I was in active labor all throughout the night. My mom came over and then she left at around 11 p.m. and my boyfriend went to sleep. And then I kind of labored alone for 3 or 4 hours, I would say, until about 3 o'clock in the morning. And I was actually really peaceful by myself. I had this little routine where I would lay in bed, and then every time I'd have a contraction, I would get up and I'd like waddle to the bathroom. I'd breathe through my contraction in the bathroom. I would just like stand and shift my feet and try to use the bathroom, and then I'd go back and lay down and sleep in between. And then around 3 or 4 in the morning, I started having like back-to-back contractions. Up until then, they had been like every 6 or 7 minutes and about a minute long. And then all of a sudden they started coming like one after the other, and I was vomiting and I was kind of like, oh my gosh, I don't know what's happening right now. So I called my doula. A little side note, my experience with my doula wasn't really what I expected it to be. And my advice to women is if you do have a doula, make very clear your expectations of how and when you want them to be present. And my doula never really asked if I wanted her there, which was kind of strange to me. I sort of felt like I needed an advocate for the person that was supposed to be my advocate. So I just recommend for women that you really clearly lay out, like at what point you want them to come, or ask your doula before you go into labor, when you're first meeting with them, to continually check in with you if you want them to be there at each point. But so I called my doula and she said, get in the shower. And up until then, I had been avoiding getting in the shower or the bathtub because I heard that it can slow down labor and I didn't want it to stall again. So at that point, though, I was like, okay. And I got in the shower and it was the best feeling. Like my contractions did slow down and it felt amazing. And then I called my mom. She came over. She really helped me. She became my doula. She was doing counter pressure on my back, and she would, help me as I was swaying through the contractions. And she was, whispering encouragement to me. And she just really helped maintain very calm and peaceful atmosphere for me and just really grounded me through that. And then around 6 in the morning, we decided to go to the birth center. I think my mom was actually the one that was like, okay, we should get to the birth center. And when we got there, I didn't want them to tell me how much I was dilated because I didn't want to get discouraged. I was like, man, so I just went through this whole night and I'm only 5 centimeters dilated. Like, I am not going to make it through this. You're going to have to take me to the hospital and give me an epidural. But they checked me and they didn't tell me. And I was actually 9 centimeters dilated when we got to the birth center. So I was like right at the finish line. And And then I knew it because like 30 minutes later, I asked, when can I get in the tub? And they're like, you can get in the tub right now, whenever you want. And I was like, oh, okay, that means I'm close. And it's funny. I was so obnoxious. I was like, I looked at my mom and my boyfriend and I was like, this isn't as hard as everyone says it is. And then I ate my words so quickly when the pushing phase came. That was as hard as people say it is. So I had an interesting experience because I think since I had a long labor, it really allowed my body to kind of gently open. And I think that was the positive side of it. And then when the pushing came, I was just kind of like, no, I don't want to do this. I was just like, you got to do this. Like, just don't be afraid, suck it up and just push her out. And after a couple pushes, her head came out. And you can see in the video too, I get this big smile on my face where I was just like, thank God that part is over. But yeah, and then the thing I loved probably most about the birth center is about 4 hours later, I was able to go home. So we got to spend the first night at home with her. Yeah, overall, it was a really positive experience. I just wish I had mentally prepared myself a little more for the pushing phase. But besides that, it was a really great experience. I was really thankful for it.
So if you could have a billboard made today where you could share one tip with moms everywhere, what would you have on it?
Always be open about your struggles with the people that you love. And I know it can be hard to be vulnerable sometimes, like especially with other moms where you kind of don't want to admit the things you're struggling with. But I think if you're the first one to open up with the hard times you're having, that leaves a safe space for other people to open up to you too. So be honest about your struggles.
Where can everyone follow you on social and your podcast as well?
Yeah, so my podcast is Chatty Broads. We're pretty much on any platform where you can find podcasts, or you can just Google it. And then I'm on Instagram, and I'm just at Bekah, so Bekah. And you can also look up my YouTube. It's Bekah Martinez, also Bekah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time and meeting with me today. I'm so excited to share your story. I think you're going to inspire so many women that watch this.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And you can follow Bekah on Instagram, and also be sure to check out our private Facebook group, Mommy Knows Best, Judgment Free Mom Tribe. Thank you for watching. I'm Krista from Mommy Knows Best.